The next potential problem is you need to make sure you're identifying and consulting people who actually are being sincere with you and know what they're talking about. One of my favorite anthropological stories was this anthropologist going in to study, I'm just going to say the Yanomamo tribe again, because I think that's who it was, in the Amazon rainforest. And he took in all his own food, own supplies. He lived in his own little tent outside of the main village, and they understood why he was there and all that. They thought he was a curiosity, but this culture believed that anything unattended was up for grabs, and it was public property. And this is similar of a lot of tribal or nomadic groups where everyone basically has the same stuff. So it's not like one person has all this hoarded wealth and other people have nothing. You all basically have the same tools, the same bedding, the same houses, the same clothes. So there's really no point in taking from someone else because they have the same thing you have already anyways. Well, this anthropologist, of course, has all sorts of things that they don't have. Like the food he eats is not like their food, but he didn't want to share his food because he brought enough food for him. And so but see, they're a very hospitable culture. If he waltzed into their village, they would all want to feed him, right? And share what they had as a group. But then they would show up at his house, like the village or all the men in the village, and expect him to reciprocate. And they were eyeing his jars of peanut butter he had on a shelf. And they were like, hey, you have food. Why don't you share your food with us? We shared your food with you. And so this anthropologist, he would make up tall tales about what kind of food it was to try to dissuade them from wanting it. And he said, oh yeah, he said, that's a specialty from my country. It comes from the poop of a small rodent. And they're like, you eat poop? And he's like, yeah, this is a jar full of rodent poop. And so none of the people in the village wanted to eat his peanut butter. And he had like a can of Vienna sausages. And you can imagine the story he told them about where those things came from. And so he had this weird relationship going with these villagers. Well, one day they, this trade boat had come up the river, and the villagers had let their canoes be in disrepair, but they wanted to paddle out so that they could trade with this boat coming up the Amazon. And the anthropologist's boat, he had paid the tribe people, the men, to make him this beautiful canoe with planks and all of this inside of it. And what the villagers did was they stripped his canoe to repair their own so they could paddle out to the boat. Well, he was outraged that they would do this. He paid good money in good faith, and now they dismantled his boat to repair their own. Well, he was finally able to make it out in his now leaking canoe to the trade boat on the river, and all the other villagers' rafts were tied up to this trade boat. And he took out his machete and he just whacked the lines of all the other villagers' boats so they went floating down the river. And they were angry to the point where they were going to kill him. And the chief was also on the boat. And he was like, wait a second, what's going on? He's like, why did you do that? And he goes, because, and he explained, I paid them to build my canoe, and then they stripped it to fix their canoe. So that's all my wood I let float down the river. It doesn't even belong to them. And when the chief heard that, he just laughed. And he was just like, you all just got what you deserved. And he spared the anthropologist's life. But these are kind of scenarios you have to think about when you come in to a different people group. You have to think they may have very different ideas about private property, ownership, hospitality, what's proper, what's improper, etc. What this anthropologist was trying to study, though, was genealogy and lineages of these tribal groups. What made it so difficult was a taboo in this culture was you do not speak the name of the dead. And so here's this poor American anthropologist trying to do field work and study on a topic that is culturally taboo to even talk about. And I don't know the religious reasons behind why you don't name the dead. Maybe you're afraid you're going to call them or summon them or something like that. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, they weren't supposed to say the name of the dead. So you can imagine that people would have really elaborate names, like third left tail feather of the monkey eagle might be somebody's name, because chances are you're not going to say all those words together in a sentence, because you don't want to end up with a lot of words in your language that you can't say because they're the names of your dead ancestors. So they would make these really precise names. And one night he had a breakthrough around the campfire. One of the natives couldn't take being badgered anymore. And he said, I'm not going to tell you the name of my dead relatives, but I'll tell you the name of that guy's dead relatives. And he just started telling him his dead mother's name, his dead grandmother's name. And the anthropologist was just overjoyed. And he's making his charts and he's making his family trees. And then that person whose ancestors got named in retaliation began to tell the names of other people's dead ancestors. And by the end of the evening, this anthropologist had the complete family tree filled out for this tribe. But he realized, because this was an exogamous tribe, and we'll get to that when we get to marriage, but exogamous means you have to marry outside of your tribe. And it makes sense, right? To avoid incest, inbreeding, you want to get a mate from another village or tribe. So he realized they had a cousin or sister tribe where they would swap mates back and forth. Young people would get their spouses from this other tribe. He realized he had to go interview them if he wanted to complete the genealogy of the tribe he was studying, because that was the other part of it. And so he goes to the other tribe, and he gives his request to the chieftain and the shaman, and they're like, oh no, because they had a similar culture. They're like, we can't give you those names. It's taboo. And he said, well, I got the names from the other tribe. And they're like, really? They told you their dead ancestor's name? And they didn't believe him. They said, okay, what was the chief's dead mother's name? And he goes, Ukalakawela. And the chief and the shaman just burst into laughter. They say that again. And he goes, Ukalakawela. And they just burst into belly laughs. And the anthropologist said, why are you laughing? And they're like, that's not the chief's dead mother's name. You just said in our language, monkey that eats vulture poop. And so the big joke was, the night he thought he was getting all the names of the ancestors, the whole tribe was just having him on by making up obscene names of other people's in the tribe's dead relatives. And so they just gave him a list of made up, bogus, obscene names that he thought he had now had this whole genealogy. So you have to be very careful who you're picking as a source. Do they know what they're talking about, and are they reliable? Like, think about maybe an anthropology student from San Diego State wanted to study us at San Diego Christian College. Well, if you're just a first-year freshman here and they're interviewing you versus interviewing someone like Lundy Karstensen, who's been here, I think, 35 years, you're going to get very different information about the norms, values, culture of this school, right? So you want to think about, who are you interviewing? How reliable do you think they are? And are they being honest and upright with you? Or are they just taking you for a proverbial anthropological ride? Any questions or comments on that?